Yeah, go ahead. Start introducing. We're going to have the panelists come on down.
We're half an hour behind.
All right, so we're going to have a panel discussion here, starting with Graeme Nichols, who's a Sens contributor for the Athletic Ottawa, runs the Sixth Sense blog, and is host of the Sixth Sense podcast. Also works as a freelance statistician, font coordinator for non-TSN hockey television broadcasts.
20?
Yeah, I'm supposed to be.
Hey, Rob. Sorry.
I was thinking of Mark Borg to ask you would moderate this panel.
So next to Graeme, we have Brad Timmons from Natural Stat Trick, I think fairly familiar sight for most of us in here. And Chris Stevenson, who covers the Senators for the Athletic and has a book to promote, which I'm sure Rob will really appreciate, that 100 Things for a Senators Fan. Senators fans should know and do before they die. I assume somewhere in there is trade your franchise's best defensive. Anyway, Rob, take it away.
All right. Before we that was a good introduction and everything, but I thought we'd just quickly let everyone sort of introduce themselves as well a little bit and just give some of their preliminary thoughts. And my idea is always just to go straight to audience questions. But first, I might let you ask each other questions first. So first, just a quick your own introduction and some of your own preliminary thoughts before we dive in.
Hi, my name is Graeme Nichols, and I'm an Ottawa Senators fan. So I've been writing on the Sixth Sense blog probably for 11 years now, actually. Lots of ups and downs. Eugene Mellicare's been interesting. It's given us plenty to write about, to talk about. And I'm happy that Michael Schucker's extended this opportunity to come in here and watch Senators hockey today. I guess that's it.
Hi, I'm Brad Timmons. I've been writing for Silver 7 for 6 or 7 years, contributing to The Athletic last year and running Natural Stat Trick for about 4 years. My suggestion for this panel was to just light a trash can on fire.
Hi, I'm Chris Stevenson. I've covered the Senators since day one for Sun Media, NHL.com, now The Athletic, which I love. So much latitude to do a lot of interesting things. And yes, I do have a book to promote out October 2nd. You can pre-order it on Amazon. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, I know the first question is obviously going to be about the Erik Karlsson trade, so why don't we just go ahead and get your thoughts on the Erik Karlsson trade?
Saddest day in Senators history that it got to that point, and you guys can talk about the empirical and statistical impact of it. But just for me, for Senators fans, from an emotional standpoint, that unfortunately it's become part of every Senators fan DNA now, that they have to learn to deal with the best player on the team at some point departing. Somebody had a great stat the other day. There's only been one captain who played his last game in the NHL with the Senators. One Senators captain, that was Laurie Boschman in the first year. Every other captain, who obviously is going to be a central figure on the team, has left under usually nefarious circumstances. So I just think emotionally for Senators fans, as much as you've seen this happen over and over and over again, this one really hurts. This wasn't the player near the end of his career with his most productive years behind him, which was the case to a certain extent with Alfredson. This was a player who's just reaching his prime, the best player, in my opinion, in the National Hockey League. And the logic just didn't add up for me, that if you were going to go into a rebuild and you wanted to select 2 or 3 veterans around which to build your team, I don't get why a guy who's in the middle of the prime of his career, who could still be productive in 3 or 4 or 5 years from now, that he wasn't the guy that you chose. And I know there's a lot of different reasons that could go into this, but both sides are culpable. But for me, it came down to money. He did not want to pay Eric Carlson what he was worth. And that's sad for Senators fans.
I think it's sad that we spent probably like the last 3, 4, 5 seasons talking about, hey, we're this team without Eric Carlson, and now we're actually going to get a chance to find out. But like going past just like the emotional baggage and just the on-ice talent that he was, you know, like if there was no return and Melnick and Dorian had to trade Eric Carlson and you were going to go through this rebuild, I think if that's the road that you have to go down, that's depressing in itself. But at the same time, it's like, well, okay, if you're actually going to move Eric Carlson, get some tangible assets back and help this team like 3, 4 years down the road, or give you like that one prospect who has like safely projectable upside. And I don't think they got any of that in that deal with San Jose.
Yeah, I gotta agree. There was nothing really to get excited about in that return, and I think they kind of, I mean, everybody said it, they were never going to win that trade, but they needed to come a little bit closer and actually have something that could generate some excitement in that return. In terms of all the captains departing, I might say Alfredson was the more emotional, the bigger emotional impact, but Carlson leaving, out of all the players, not just the captains that have left this team, that one is going to have the biggest impact on the on-ice product, for sure.
And it's also kind of weird that they talked about how they identified Eric Carlson in February as being the person who could return the highest return. And then you look at what the actual return is, it's like, whoa, that wasn't very much. Like, what happens if Mark Stone's traded next, or Matt Duchene? Like, what can you expect? And how is the relationship with Dorian going to change with the other GMs who might look at the Carlson return and be like, hey, this guy's right for a fleecing?
You know, and again, talking about the logic of all of it, I mean, so much of it didn't add up. If you had made the decision in February now that you were going to embark on this rebuild plan, for me, you give Colorado the pick at the draft last summer, and you take your chances on perhaps having the number one, and you know, the scouts that I've spoken to say the next 2 drafts are way deeper than the 2018 draft. If you were going to rebuild, and it looks like you're going to be in that position where you've got the best odds, even if you don't think they're great odds, for me, in February, if you decide you're going to rebuild, you give up that pick in June, and now at least the fans here for the course of this winter, every time there's a loss, there's going to be a part of the fan that's going to say, okay, well, at least that's another step closer to us having the best percentage of getting the number 1 pick in the draft. Now, those losses are going to pile up and you got nothing to look forward to. Like, for me, it's just a flawed strategy in terms of co-opting your fans into supporting this rebuild.
Especially now in a league that incentivizes losing. Like, you know, you want to be in the bottom part of the league. If your team's going to be bad, you want to be as bad as you possibly can, so you get the highest draft odds. And you know, you look at some of the other organizations around the league who've had like multiple high picks late, and they're still struggling to reach that next step of their development curve as an organization because of the mismanagement that's going on with other pieces of the roster. And my concern is, as a fan and as someone who covers the team regularly, if you're continue to make those mismanagement decisions that don't involve that first overall pick or top 5 pick or top 10 pick or whatever it may be, how are you going to progress as a franchise to that next step? And I think under Eugene Melnick and his rash decisions and his impulsive actions and words that push the GMs in a certain direction, in different directions all the time. Like, we went 2.5 months between a Matt Duchene trade and this decision that they were going to rebuild in February. So if the team's going to continue to be impulsive at the smallest sign of success, maybe next year, maybe 2 years from now, there's no long-term development plan. And it puts a lot of pressure on the guys within the hockey ops department to get decisions right. Like, what's the margin for error here?
There's a hockey ops.
Elias is laughing at that one. That's a good one, Chris.
It wasn't just about giving up the draft pick this year or not either. It's been some of the patterns of the trades, right? Like, you look at some of the trades around the trade deadline, and they do kind of fit that mold of moving into a rebuild, but then you look at the return Ottawa got for Hoffman versus one San Jose then got for Hoffman, and which of those returns would have been better for a team that was going into a full rebuild?
But at the same time, like, if we're downplaying And as bad as the Carlson return was, like if moving past, like the organization did say some good things. Like Dorian came in and said, "All right, we're going to invest in analytics. We're going to put more money into scouting. We're going to go about it that way." But it puts a lot of pressure on the organization to go out and find the right people to do that. And those are just words. You want to see actions. You want to see more hires in those respective fields. And like I hope we get it at some point, because I think the organization desperately needs it, especially as a small market franchise that can't necessarily attract the best candidates who may be available on the market.
Well, you know, the way I look at it, you'll invest, for instance, $2.5 million in Alex Burrows and wind up having to buy him out. And you give up a blue chip prospect to boot. So that hurts you both developmentally and financially. So, you know, those kind of decisions. So they're giving $2.5 million of dead money on the roster to Burrows this year. And I just think about that small investment in the hockey department, for me, in terms of more boots on the ground, more opinions. I mean, and let's face it, as much as you can use analytics and everything else to look at things, scouting is a large part, art and experience. And for me, the more voices that you have in that room to talk about the merits of different players, and I'm not talking just from the amateur prospect aspect, but I think one of the areas where this team has been particularly weak has been in the identification of pro prospects, pro scouting, the guys that they're getting back. And for me, the more voices that you've got in that room, the more opinions that you've got, and not yes men, people who are going to legitimately disagree if they think the team is making a bad decision. How far would that $2 million go in terms of augmenting the voices in that hockey department?
You mentioned Dorian saying a lot of the right things recently about expanding analytics, expanding the department. The other thing to keep in mind is we heard those same right things in Melnick's letter late last season, and then they were already starting to walk them back a bit by the town halls, right? There was expanding, you know, getting more manpower, and then by the time we got to the town halls, it was, well, we need to hire the right people.
Right. And I think the thing that kind of bothers me a little bit as well, like I've been coming to these conferences, I think this is my third year out of 4, and there's a lot of Senators fans who are involved heavily in this community. And I think it's such a lost opportunity that the organization either hasn't reached out or just landed these guys jobs within the field. Because I think that's something that the organization should be totally leveraging. I think there's a missed opportunity there. And there's some very, very smart people in this room, and I think it's just something that they should be exploring.
I don't think there's any question about that. And I'm sure that there's maybe some people in this room, passionate Senators fans, who love the opportunity to try and make their team better with whatever skills they could bring to the table. And you know, I just travel around the league, talk to people all the time. It really irks me, you know, because there were a few empty seats at one of the playoff games, that everybody questions the marketplace. And I look at the reaction the other day after the Carleton deal, and those guys on TSN 1200 being there from 6 p.m. until 3 a.m., 9 hours of, and I was part of it for a little portion of it. I could, you know, I'm not surprised at the level of passion that there is in this marketplace for this team, and that's the thing I think that you look at it. And it's unfortunate that the current ownership isn't in a place to be able to tap into that passion, because I think there are thousands and thousands of hockey fans here, and all they want is a reason to love their team.
Yeah, hey, let's open up now. Let's get some questions for our Senators experts. I'm going to start on this side of the room. I'm lazier than Scott, so I'm going to take questions on this side. And then I'll take questions from that side. And how much time do we have? I know because we're behind a little bit.
Let's do about 15 minutes.
Total. So I'll take 5 on each side of the room, and then we'll go back to the panel for the final 5. So questions on this side of the room? Horrible, just, okay, we got one there.
Hi, so as let's charitably call it a budget team, do you think it's possible? Do you think it's a reasonable expectation that there's a way for Ottawa to be playoff competitive at like a very, very, very low like cap floor price by leveraging enough entry-level contracts on good players? Like conceptually, is it possible? Or as long as, you know, we're spending the minimum, there's just, you know, no point to looking forward to anything other than the 8th overall pick?
No, that's a great question. Like, but for me, like, you look at like the baseball model, right? Like you have your haves and you have your have-nots, and the spread is significant. And you can have your Pittsburgh Pirates and you can have your Yankees team. And then in hockey, because of the floor, it's the discrepancy to me, at least looking at it from the outside, like the discrepancy to me is big enough to overcome. Like you should be able to field a competitive roster right away. I mean, changes to the CBA have obviously affected, you know, you can't draft a lot of players. Look at Toronto's situation this summer. They're forced to re-sign all their big name RFAs to big deals faster than in years past. So that's a challenge. Your younger players are getting richer faster. And then that's something that Ottawa would obviously have to look at and overcome as a rebuilding team. And to Chris's point, like if they're having a hard time paying the guys that deserve and need the money, that's a huge concern moving forward.
It's a great question, and I'd love to be able to sit in a room with general managers and pick their brains in terms of the philosophies of team building, because I do think that we're starting to see some teams look at it. And I might have even been able to buy the argument from the Senators if they said, you know what, we've decided in terms of our team building that we don't think that it doesn't make sense to pay one player $12 or $13 million a year. If you could show me the evidence, I could buy into that. And this is the reason why we didn't sign Erik Karlsson and why we think we should be moving on. But specifically, I think you can do it, but the window is very, very small. As Graeme said, when you get guys to the third year of their ELC, where they're going to need a new contract, but have been in the league long enough, you know, as an elite prospect, that they're starting to have an impact, a really good impact on your roster. That window where you're going to be able to do it, somewhere around the cap floor of 60 or 62 million, it's going to be a very, very small window where you would be capable of doing it. But yes, I think we are going to see teams that will have maybe that 1 or 2 seasons where they can be competitive with a relatively small payroll.
I mean, the short answer is yes. For the playoffs, I don't think you're really going to build a competitive roster in terms of being real cup contenders on all ELCs. And like Chris said, I think the window is very, very short for that, because you're talking, you know, you have multiple years of rookies on ELCs and they're overlapping. You kind of have to have everything line up, and you might be talking at 1 year. And the next year you're either falling back out or your payroll's going way up because you're having to sign those guys who are coming off the ELCs to much higher contracts.
Okay, we'll take one more from this side.
So the Ottawa Senators went from a team in the conference finals all the way to the bottom of the league. How did luck, skill, and character factor into them going all the way to the conference finals?
I don't think I could answer that. I mean, I think a lot of people are starting to examine, you know, the role of luck in a team's fortunes. I think it's more interesting the slide down from having gone to the conference final to what happened last season. And I think these are where we start getting into, you know, a lot of people hate the term, but the intangibles and the stuff that came out about what happened in that dressing room involving some of the players, Hoffman, Karlsson, there's significant others, as is often the case. While it is happening, not much of it becomes public. Certainly, you know, those of us around the team hinted at whatever, we weren't getting any information about exactly what was going on, but you did have the sense that you know, there was some kind of tension present in the room that wasn't there the season before. And then, of course, afterwards, as is often the case, the truth starts to come out. So I don't think you can underestimate the impact of again, an overused term, chemistry, but you can't ignore what happened in the dressing room and the interpersonal relationships among the players. It might sound like a trite cliche when they talk about, the really good teams, they have a room where everybody wants to play for each other. That was as far from the truth as you could get. It might have been the case on the run to the conference final, but that was completely absent in the dressing room last year. And it's surprising to me that the room could have been as poisoned as it was and not more action taken earlier. Like, I just don't understand how management couldn't, and they said, we heard rumors of it near the end of the season. Like, management's got to be more in touch with what's going on in their workplace, inside their room. Right. You know what, the thing, and again, like, I think about when Brian Murray was here, I think a lot of what's gone on with the team right now can be attributed to the absence of Brian Murray. But, I remember Brian telling me one day he spent 80% of his time managing up and 20% of his time managing down. He was able to handle the owner in terms of his expectations and the impact that he had. And one of the things that Brian was great at, and I can remember walking him, he had all these crooked fingers, and he'd have his venti Starbucks, and he'd come into the rink. He would talk to us media guys. He'd be talking to the trainers. He'd be talking to the assistant coach. He'd be talking to the video. He'd be, stopping players on their way between the gym and the dressing room. And it was just communication and talking. And, a few of us had been around the team for a while. When we heard about, what went on last year, I said, can you imagine how Brian would have handled that? He would have, grabbed both of those guys and said, office! And he would have known what, again, I'm making a big assumption, but he would have known what was going on because of those communication skills that he had. So, long answer, there's probably a lot of different reasons. But that stuff that went on in the dressing room for me is the biggest explanation as to why they went from a goal away to the Stanley Cup final to being in 30th place.
And Craig Anderson's save percentage.
Something encouraging. At the golf tournament the other day, I ended up, Guy Boucher couldn't play because he's got a back issue. So we ended up having a long chat. I think he referred to a heat map to me. I think, because he did mention a red blob on the left side. So for me, I found that encouraging that he said, did you see that red blob? I'm like, yeah, I saw the red blob. And he said, why do you think there was a red blob there? And I said, I don't know, the fact that Mark McCott was gone? Yeah. So it's encouraging.
In terms of the run to the conference finals and how those three things, I think all three of those things played in together. A lot of those one-goal games that can come down to a lot of luck. There's no denying the skill with the absolute clinic Erik Karlsson was putting on throughout those playoffs. And, Chris can attest to this more than I can, being around the team a bit more. He's saying you do get a sense. You can never really know what the chemistry is in the room if you're not in the room, but being around the team, you do get a sense of it. And all the reporters, the sense of it around the team in those playoffs was that things were really clicking for them. I don't think you can really break it down into saying, it was 20% luck, 50% skill, and 30% chemistry, but they were definitely all there.
That said, I think the best organizations in the league recognize true talent levels, and being one goal away from a conference final or from the Stanley Cup final probably wasn't a true measure of that team's ability to have sustained success. So I think recognizing that and kind of making moves moving forward, like the Shane trade, obviously, and yeah, exactly. So you can avoid some mistakes that way. And I think the smart GMs in the league have a better finger on the pulse than what Ottawa did.
On the flip side, when you look at the team on paper they had last year, they were not a 67-point team either. As much as things went right in that conference finals run, they went horribly, horribly wrong last year, and they vastly underperformed.
Okay, we've got time for one more on this side of the room. I'm sorry. Only one more. The most enthusiastic person. Or the one that makes me walk the slowest distance. That's probably
Just quickly, based off yesterday, obviously what happened with Carleton, where do you guys think right now, leadership-wise? Not sure what's going to happen with Duchesne or Stone and stuff, but as of right now, leadership, where do you guys think they look to? What's as of right now?
Mark Borgiaski interviews every day, 7 days a week.
I think you're going to see Mark Stone really fill whatever void was there from Erik Karlsson, and maybe he was the de facto captain anyway within that dressing room. It doesn't sound like they're going to officially name a captain, and that makes sense with the uncertain futures for the guys who would be at the top of your list. Stone, Duchesne, who knows if they're going to be here for this season. But I think absolutely you're going to see Stone and Duchesne be the guys that step up to fill that void.
Yeah, I'll definitely add that. I think Stone's probably going to be the more outward-facing the franchise for at least as long as he is there this season, if he's there for the whole season or not.
That was quick enough that I think we can just squeeze in one more, because I know there's 3 here at the back making me walk. But if it's a quick one? Okay, quick one. Pick a quick one.
So also referring to the Carleton trade from yesterday, why do you think the Sens were so intent on trading him to the Western Conference? Like, not even like another Eastern Conference team, let alone their own division, but like, do you agree with the restriction that they put on themselves to do that? Especially considering they're a rebuilding team and he only has 1 year left on his deal.
I've never been an advocate of that idea that I shouldn't trade this guy within my division or trade this guy within my conference. We are seeing the fortunes of teams change so quickly now in this salary cap era. You know, teams, rise up, they fall off. If you're rebuilding and you're trading Erik Karlsson, and people would, be aghast if you got traded to a team in their division. The odds are, if your plan is to rebuild and be a contender in 3 or 4 years, the team that you're trading him to probably isn't going to be a contender in 3 or 4 years for some of the reasons we were just talking about in terms of them inevitably running into some kind of salary cap crunch and having to shed a bunch of their assets. So I don't buy into, we can't have this guy be in the Eastern Conference. And it's interesting that I called it the Hoffman clause, but there is a clause in that deal with San Jose that if he winds up on an Eastern Conference roster at any point during this season, that the Senators get another first-round draft pick. So I guess once burned, get a first-round draft pick.
I do wonder if that clause is less about the Eastern Conference in general and more about just not wanting to list certain specific Eastern Conference teams.
Would that be predominantly a blue team?
Yeah, not too far away either.
It's optics. It's always optics.
All right, I'd like to thank our panelists for joining us. So, do we have?
We have a break for lunch now. Anyone who is wearing a yellow sash, I don't.